Welcome back to another episode of the Autonomy podcast. And I've got two screens going on now, so escalating the game, as they would say. I'm just trying out new shit because I like tech. I also just like fucking around with shit. So if this doesn't work, I don't give a fuck. It's absolutely fine as it is. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you're watching this on Spotify, watch the video and you'll find out two videos. So today's podcast is about how to get back on the bandwagon after you've got off the bandwagon. So let's take a deep dive into what that truly means. Most people believe that there is a bandwagon to start with. So, for example, most people believe there's a right way to do things, then there's a wrong way to do things, and ultimately it comes down to what your perception is of a diet or what it is that you're doing. Do I not do the things that I'm supposed to do? Sometimes, yes. Am I falling off the bandwagon because I'm not doing some things? No, I'm just not doing some things. And I think most of it relates back to something that we spoke about or have been speaking about for a while, which is if the diet you're on or the nutrition strategy that you're doing isn't something in your lifestyle, you'll find it really difficult to do for the long term. So therefore, when you're doing something that is hard, requires a bit of discipline, you feel like you're on. You feel like you're in it, on it, focused, got the drive, desire, got the motivation. And then on the flip side of things is that when you don't have it, you're off it. You're not doing anything as part of it. And I think the way that you look at the bandwagon is there's a difference between what you're not doing some things that you're not supposed to do, which is fine, that's normal life. And then the other things is I'm absolutely on it, and when I'm on it, I do great, and when I'm off it, then I'm completely off it. Normally the bandwagon disparity is when the thing that you're trying to do is far away from what you actually want to do or your normal life. So some people's bandwagon might be meal prepping every single day, tracking on MyFitnessPal, doing 15k steps, eating low carb, doing a keto diet. They might have to be on it to do those things. Whereas when you're off it, you're ordering takeaway, you're eating mum's cooking, you're eating anything that's in front of you, you're having plenty more snacks, you're not going to the gym, you're not doing your steps. There's a massive disparity between the two. So whichever way we look at it, the goal is to get back to doing the thing that you were doing before. Otherwise, the goals that you're trying to get are not going to get given. So what I would definitely recommend is looking at, what normal fallacies do we normally fall into when we stop doing these things? What do we tell ourselves? Because that's a good place to start. Is what's our thought process? Normally the thought process is I'll start on Monday. Normally the thought process, I've got that holiday in 2 weeks, so what I'll do is it's no point in dieting for 2 weeks, so I'll stay off the bandwagon, and then after the holiday I'll get proper on it. Or I'm going away to India for the month of July, so I'll just start when I get back. These are often fallacies that we con ourselves into thinking because we're trying to think that there's a perfect time. We're trying to strategize things. We're trying to justify what that next step is, basically in the midst of not taking action straight away. The easiest way to put it plain and simple, the easiest way to get off the bandwagon is to get back on it by doing the same things you were doing before. But that doesn't normally happen because we've always got an excuse or a rationale or a reason behind it. And I think that the easiest way to look at this whole bandwagon thing, the more that you get on it after you've been off it, the easier it is to get back on it and on it over. So for example, there's times where I've done diets before that have been absolutely terrible, and I would just not do anything for 2 weeks, then I'd go back on it for a week, and then I'd fall off it for 3 weeks. And I think adherence, consistency, and getting back on it is a skill that requires repetition. So, the first time I went off a plan, I was off the plan for a whole week. And then the second time when I recognized that wasn't helpful, I then got back on it in 5 days, then 3 days, then 2 days. Then I just had a meal and then got back on it afterwards. And over time, you learn that repetition if you want to practice it, if you see the value in getting back on it. And I think that's also a big trick is most people don't see the benefits or the ramifications of their decision making. So if you're off it for a day, most people say, I'll just get back on it tomorrow, there's no problem. And then 2 weeks later or a week later, they're seeing the scale weight go up by 2 kilos, and they don't correlate the two together of where they've had a day where they've had fucking whatever they want, or they've had a week of where they've had what they want, and they don't see the correlation, or they're just, it's just water weight. They don't see any negative costs to it. They'll rationalize or downplay the negative costs. So then you won't actually take action with it. Whereas when I stepped on scales, and I was like, holy fuck, I've fucked it, and I shouldn't have had that week off, and all my decisions are coming back on top of me. I took the accountability there to go, right, I need to do something fucking about this. And then you learn to get back on it and then back on it. So it's a repetitive skill. You want to kind of aim longer term to just be very segmented with your off and on approach. So if you have a meal that wasn't to plan, or there wasn't where it was supposed to go, or you fell back into old habits, you can segment that meal to then be tomorrow you can get back on it. But initially you might start with, I'm on it for 2 days, I'm off it for 14. and then vice versa, that comes 3 days, then 12 days, then basically it crosses over, 7 on, 7 off, and then you're basically merging it around the corner to eventually be on it for 14, 21, 28 days, and then maybe off it for 1. So the repetitive nature of what we're trying to do is going to be really, really important. And once we've got that repetition and we get closer and closer and closer to being off it as little as possible, then the bandwagon's not going to feel like a bandwagon. It's just going to feel like a meal out. But the longer this day is, the longer the week is, the longer you're going to feel out of sorts, out of habit, out of routine. And that's when it's hard to get back on. The longer you leave something, the more the pain of starting it again will be increasing. So, if you don't do your finances for a week and then you do them, okay, maybe I missed some bits in there. Or equally, you don't do your finances for a year, the pain of trawling back through a whole year's worth of finances to be like, fucked up there, shouldn't have spent that, shouldn't have done that, is more and more and more. And then the more we learn that the longer we leave shit, the worse it gets, the better we can be. Anything that is left unresolved, unsolved, untouched, unthought about, normally ends up in a negative spot. As much as we want to kind of put a rose-tinted glasses on this, the more you leave it untouched and just like kind of less thought about, the harder it is to get back on. So when you're looking at getting back on the bandwagon, if you've been off it for a small period of time, then you're going to need to look at, what creates action? That's all you're looking for, right? You're looking for, how do I take that first step? That may be something I don't want to do, but I'm going to have to do it because I want to get back on it. Then you look at what creates action. So the easiest way to create action is to diarize it, to put it into your routine, and then choose to do something like that over the better possibility. So for example, like you might choose to go to the gym in the morning, even though the thought of staying in bed is a better option. The short-term pain that you're going to experience is dependent on how long you've left it. If you haven't been in the gym in a couple of months, there will be a high degree of pain, a high degree of you can't be arsed, there'll be a high degree of like the other things are better than going to that gym and doing that session. But once you get back into that one session, then you can do the second session, then you can do the third session, then you can roll and roll and roll. And then before you know it, you're in that habit and routine again. So it's about then showing up when you don't really want to, and then being in that situation where you're rolling again on that quote unquote bandwagon. So what to do when it's from a nutrition perspective? So for me personally, when we're looking at like the bandwagons and kind of getting back onto it and moving in the right direction and getting to a routine, it comes down to conscious competence or conscious thought process. So the more you think about it, the more you'll do those particular things. If you don't think about doing your accounts, you're not going to do them. Whereas the more you're consciously, I don't know if anyone else has this in the UK, but in Dubai, every time you tap your card, every time you pay your card, you get a notification of how much you spent on what your account balance is. There is nothing more gut-wrenching than doing that when you're going shopping, because you're like, holy shit, I just spent X amount on this thing. Was it really worth it? That's a conscious thought process because you're getting immediate feedback. And that's what we need to do with our nutrition, is almost make it more conscious. So whether that's you've stopped doing like a to-do list in the morning and you're now not even scheduling in your workouts into your routine, or you're not even scheduling your eating times into your routine. It's going back to the baseline of what keeps your day moving. And you'll know if you've not had a routine, then had a routine, how more structured and thoughtful your day is when you have a routine and a schedule on a day-to-day basis. So when you're looking at like what makes it move in the right direction, it's going to be getting a routine in place and getting that step-by-step process of what that next move is. So when you can break it down into days and hours and then mornings and afternoons, then you can then start blocking your time and make it available to take the action. At the moment in time, there's no availability to take action because there's no conscious thought around about what you're doing at 11, what you're doing at 7, what you're doing at 4, what you're doing at 6. But once you make that routine, you're like, right, tomorrow I'm going to do A, B, C, and D, then that's really, really cool. Now, most people do this, but in the wrong way. So most people, when they're off the bandwagon, they're like, they need some big motivation thing. They go and start a new diet, or they go and I'll go back on the juice cleanse, or I'll go back on the low carb diet. I'll starve myself for a few days just to get into the swing of things. And what they're trying to do is the same thing that I'm trying to suggest, which is get a routine. But most people do it at the cost of extreme measures or the God tier of like aggressive dieting. So whilst they're trying to get back into the swing of things, they compare that with the dog shit hardest thing to do. No wonder they don't stick around, those diets don't kind of stay the course of time. most people's mindset is let me get a routine, but then our thoughts get carried away with the whole let me eat back some of that, maybe that fat gain that I've gained, and maybe I need to, they use the diet method as a bit of a stopgap and like a stable, this is my next step. Whereas actually most people don't need to change what they're doing. They don't need to change their diet method, how aggressive they're going, how many steps they're doing, the cardio. They just need to do the things they were doing before to get the same results that they were getting before. So if you lost 5 kilos in a month and then you were off it for 3 weeks, you don't need anything else other than the thing that lost you 5 kilos to get back in the mojo with things. Now, most people feel like they need a higher weighting and think, I need to go more aggressive now. I need to be better than I was before. I need to make up the lost time. And in that sense, they risk going back off the bandwagon because the bandwagon is relative to how tolerant you are to stress, how tolerant you are to adherence, how consistent you are. And the more you make the diet hard, the more you do more things in your day, the more risk that you take to stay on the bandwagon. And the more you do, the more less diet, the more aggressive diets that you do, you're on this tightrope of like, you could be a little bit more hungry in the evening and then you could eat a bag of crisps and then it could be off the bandwagon again. So most people don't need to do anything different. They just need to do the things that we're doing before and recognize that routine and conscious thoughts and repetition are going to be your major factors when coming into getting back on the bandwagon. The point that most people miss, and circulating back to my initial thoughts of like this whole bandwagon thing, is like, if the diet was the right thing for you and that way of eating was the right thing, why is there a large distinction between on the bandwagon and off the bandwagon? So for example, like with our clients, we rarely see this when it comes to a nutrition side of things because we utilize a strategy where they're eating home cooked food, they're eating the parents' food, and therefore during the week, they can't be off or on the bandwagon because that's what they were going to do anyway. They may just have more portions because they're not feeling motivated to, portion their food out, which is different than going from eating tofu and veggies or doing a shake for lunch than eating their mum's cooking, which is, could be 1,000 calories. There's a massive difference in disparity between what they're normally doing versus what they're doing when they're on it. And I think bridging the gap there and finding, something in between that allows you to get the results that you want to get, but not too far away from what you would do if you weren't on a diet. Because eventually you're going to come back to that other thing. Like if I was not dieting or dieting, my food choices would be similar. I would just have more of the stuff when I'm not dieting and I would have less of the stuff when I am dieting. And that's where we want to get to when it comes to the limiting the chances between bandwagon on, bandwagon off. There should be very little difference. Maybe there's more Deliveroos and more evenings out, which are not calorie controlled, versus your normal Monday to Friday, your breakfast when you're on it versus off it are going to be near enough the same. And that's where you want to get to. If you want to also, before you go off and on the bandwagon, the probability of you being off and on the bandwagon is comparable to how different your diet is when you're off versus on. And if you can get your diet strategy very similar to your off strategy, you're not going to lose. You just eat less or more of them particular things. So for example, like if you're off the diet and then breakfast is granola, well, you could do that on a diet too. You just probably don't know how to. And if your evening meal is mum's cooking, when you're off the diet and when you're on the diet, it's tofu and veggies, then why don't you learn how to eat mum's cooking and lose weight? And that's what we do at Autonomy. So limiting the exposure between off and on is going to be really, really important. And ultimately you can find that very easily by just, as I spoke about, look at what your off is versus your on. And if there's a massive difference, if one side is keto, one side is low carb, one side is no snacks, one side is no South Asian food, but then the other side is all South Asian food. You're waking up and having fucking idli and dosa, and then you're having mum's cooking for dinner, and you're having whatever she's making in the evening. Then no wonder when you're trying to do this shake diet, or when you're trying to do these Weight Watchers, or when you're trying to do tofu and veggies weighed out 3 times a day, no wonder it's hard to get back on it, because it's fucking miserable. Like if you're off is enjoyable, that's what we should say. Is like your off diet is what's enjoyable to you because that's short-term gratification. That's, I don't care about my results. I don't care about the future. I don't care about what's happening right over there. I care about what's happening right now because that's what's important to me, because I'm fucked it, I'm off it, I don't care. I just want to enjoy right now. And if in the moment, in now, you go for those type of foods, That's what you find enjoyable. So, because no one does anything you don't want to do and you don't enjoy. Like, why do I vape? Why do I drink Corona when I go out with my mates? Because I fucking like it. And therefore, when you're off it is so enjoyable and you're on it is so miserable, but has loads of benefits of like fat loss, there's only so much you can do miserable for or not enjoyable for before it comes like a rubber band and springs back and hits you in the face. So, in a long short of things, getting on and off the bandwagon is to make the bandwagon that is on it not very different to when you're off it. Just maybe some different portion sizes, maybe some different quantity of meals, maybe some less choices around Deliveroo and takeaways. And then equally, it's about repetition. So if you have this good strategy over here with your diet and nutrition, and it's good into your lifestyle, and then you just haven't practiced being on the bandwagon or being consistent, what we call it, enough to warrant being able to do it for 14, 21, 28, 32, 60 days. Because consistency and adherence to a plan that is not your normal takes skill acquisition. It's like everything takes practice. And if you can repeat the process of like being on it for 10 days, then off it for 2, then on it for 2, on it for 15, then off it for 2, and you get longer into that stretch of repetitive with consistency without breaking it, over time you just become that person that can do 14, 21 days without going off plan, without having to jump off the bandwagon. But most people need to start at, doing 2 to 3 days on something, which is a good process for them in their lifestyle, and practice falling off and getting back on as fast as possible. Because the faster you make it, if you're off it for 5 days, then on it for 5 days, you net positive 0 and you're never going to make any progress. Whereas if you can go on for 6 days, have half a day off, and then go great for another 14 days and then maybe have half a day off, you're going to see fucking great progress. Because no one in this world outside of weirdo bodybuilders that do absolute, like Miss Millie does like 16 weeks of dieting where she's absolutely militant, everything and thing. Normal life isn't like that. She'll do that, other bodybuilders will do that. We're not like that. I've done it before. It's great when you have veins on your abs for a moment and the rest of the time it's really hard and there's 0 point in doing it. So if you can just get to 21 days without being off it and then structuring in like an evening meal out or a day where you have some extra food, 21 days on, 1 day off, 21 days on, 1 day off, over a 45-day period, you've been off it 2 days, and then you've been on it 43, you're going to make fucking epic progress if those 43 days are accurate and they're good. So hopefully that helps with the bandwagon. If you're off it, get back on it. Repetitive nature, break through the barriers, break a routine, take action with it. And then equally, if you're consistently going off and on the bandwagon, really assess is what you're doing on actually what you want to do, and bridging the gap between what your life looks like when you're off the bandwagon and on the bandwagon and making it as similar as possible is going to be the key diet for you. Hope that makes sense. Hopefully you'll love this podcast. Have a lovely rest of your day and speak to you in the next podcast.